So I've just read this fascinating interview with Jim Farley, the CEO of Ford, that was recently in Car Magazine. You can see it online. And I have to admit, I'm both surprised and intrigued by what I read. Farley has essentially declared that Ford, the company that gave us the Model T and literally brought motoring to the masses, is stepping away from the mass market pretty much altogether. It's almost impossible to believe, right? The maker of the car that defined affordable mobility, the Model T, is now pivoting towards what? Towards performance and luxury vehicles. What is going on here? I'll tell you what, let's get more into this interview right after this.
A brown car guy.
So it's a fascinating interview, and it could give an insight not just into what Ford is thinking and planning, but perhaps what could be a fundamental shift in the entire automotive world order that is happening right now. So Farley says in this interview, we're getting out of the boring car business and into the iconic vehicle business. There's an interesting choice of words there. I mean, are they saying that they have built their empire on boring cars, that they've been selling us boring cars forever? I guess you could say that, Fiesta, Cortina, Mondeo, Focus. But on the other hand, I think they're underselling themselves. I've always found that Ford have always put a little bit of extra ingredients, a little bit extra spice into the vehicles to make them not quite as boring as that would suggest. But anyway, we get what he's saying. I mean, it's just the regular, ordinary cars is what he's referring to. But it sounds like they've decided to get away from that and focus on, what you could call the heritage-rich stuff. The Mustangs, Broncos, the Raptors, and the fast Fords, while leaving behind what we once thought of as Ford's bread and butter. The Fiesta, Focus, Mondeo. I mean, these were household names for decades, cars that millions of people relied on for their daily driving. But now Ford's walking away from them. Farley even admitted that while these cars were loved by a lot of customers, they couldn't justify the continued investment. I mean, that's the real crux of the issue here, isn't it? Because these cars do need a lot of investment, engineering, research and development, trial and testing before putting them out in the market to make sure that they're reliable, rugged, dependable, the sort of stuff that we want from a Ford. But if you think about the fact that you take something like a car or a Fiesta, which, low profit margins, but huge amount of investment. And it kind of doesn't make sense for the manufacturer, especially when they're having to spend so much money in transitioning to the EV market, which I'm going to come back to in a minute. But just from what he's saying, it just sounds like an incredible shift in strategy for one of the world's major car manufacturers. I mean, don't get me wrong. I'm excited about what he's saying and what it could mean. I mean, I love that they're saying they don't want to make boring cars anymore. I mean, who wants boring cars? I don't want boring cars. I'm sure you don't want boring cars. And let's be honest, the Mustang is an icon. I adore that thing. And I'm so glad that they're committing to continuing to make it. Even while Chevrolet has killed the Camaro and the Dodge Charger Challenger duo have sadly lost the Hemi V8. They're going EV for a while it's getting a 6-cylinder back later on. But no more Hemi V8s. Meanwhile, if you look beyond that, if you look at the SUV category that they've got, if you like, the Bronco has that, undeniable rugged charm, something like a Wrangler and a Defender. In fact, I think they should definitely bring the Bronco. Is not on sale in the UK, and they should definitely bring it here. And something from what Farley actually said in this interview suggests that they're definitely thinking about it, because he's even quoted as saying, it could easily be right-hand drive. And indeed it could, because fundamentally it's based on a Ford Ranger, the pickup truck. It's based on that, and we do get those in right-hand drive here. So it wouldn't be hard for them to do it. And then in addition to those, you've also, of course, got, America's one of their best-selling vehicle in America, which is the Ford F-150. And then, of course, you've got the Raptor versions of that and the Bronco, which are just outrageous and crazy brilliant machines, right? So what is happening here? Is this a sign of something bigger? Are traditional car makers like Ford effectively surrendering the fight for the mass market in the face of the Chinese EV onslaught? Is this what's actually happening? It almost feels like they've taken one look at the growing dominance of Chinese car manufacturers in this new EV space and said, you know what? You can have it. We're going to focus on the cool stuff, the heritage stuff that, well, that the Chinese can't actually replicate because they don't have that. Well, not at the moment anyway. Farley himself admitted that Tesla and Chinese car companies are Ford's biggest competitors in that EV space. And he seems well aware of the need to carve out a different path for Ford to somehow continue to stay relevant. But at the same time, Ford is still continuing to focus on electric vehicles. In fact, he gave this interview at an event that was based on the Ford Explorer. And the new Ford Explorer is electric. It's based on a platform. It's this partnership that they got with Volkswagen. So although they have the cars like the Mustang Mach-E, which is an EV SUV which they developed and which obviously benefits from that link to that heritage of the Mustang, so it kind of gives them a little bit of a cool tint to that car. But the Explorer, for example, the new car, that's just based on Volkswagen EV architecture. Similarly to the, well, dare I mention it, the all-new Capri, the return of the Capri, the reborn Capri. Although, to be honest, it's the same as the Explorer. It's based on VW architecture. But to be honest with you, probably the less said about that one, the better. I really do think that Ford needs to rethink the new Capri. Oh, sorry to interrupt. Are you enjoying the video? Well, make sure you've punched the like button. It helps. So anyway, it seems they are trying to straddle this line between embracing the electric future but holding on to the internal combustion icons that made Ford what it is today. Farley even promised, I would say, that Ford would continue to make the Mustang V8 manual for as long as they're allowed to do so, for as long as it is legal for them to do so. Well, thank God for that. And Mr. Farley, you are a hero of mine, even just for saying that. There is nothing like the roar of a proper V8 internal combustion engine, especially in a muscle car body, especially with a manual transmission. But let's take a step back for a moment. What's really interesting here is Ford's decision to abandon that mainstream market. Remember the so-called fast Fords that they mentioned, right? RSs, STs. Well, I mean, the reason these cars are cool and desirable is because they're born out of ordinary, regular, everyday versions, right? People aspire to the Focus RS and the Fiesta ST. And what happens is they'll walk into a showroom to look at that Focus RS and look at that Fiesta ST, drool over those cars, but then probably end up signing the dotted line on a cooking version of the Focus and Fiesta, which is not really an ST or RS, but at least they get some of that magic dust of that performance version on the car that they've got. And I think that's what actually makes fast Forward special. Not just that they exist by themselves in the bubble, but that they have grown out of something that most people tend to drive around, but every now and then you get these special versions, the RS, STs, etc., etc. So, I mean, that was the beauty of Ford, right? And Ford catered to everyone. So if they're only going to be making these high-end performance and luxury models, if you like, then going back to that earlier mention of the aspirational aspect of these cars, what happens to that? I mean, by doing this, isn't Ford just risking alienating the everyday Ford customer? And what about the industry at large? Could we see other legacy car makers also follow in Ford's footsteps? Maybe. I mean, Ford is potentially playing the long game here, aren't they? They're banking on the idea that the mainstream market will increasingly be dominated by Chinese brands, particularly for EVs. So, I mean, and we're already seeing, Chinese manufacturers like BYD and MG, which is really Chinese, let's be honest. These companies are making huge strides, huge inroads, and the cars, not just in terms of being cheap and affordable, but they're actually really, really good and actually getting quite desirable. So maybe Ford is thinking, well, you know what? Let them fight out in that space, and we'll just stick to what we do best. But it's a heck of a gamble, isn't it? I mean, it's a bold move. And there's always a chance that it could backfire. I mean, if they pull out of the space that they once dominated, i.e. the mass market, and niche down, if that niche should suddenly collapse for whatever reason, that could mean instant extinction. Although I guess they are kind of hedging their bets with that whole EV tie-up with Volkswagen. Nonetheless, it does appear that they're giving up on mainstream motors. Yet Ford's legacy is built on affordability and accessibility. So turning their back on that mainstream market could alienate the very people that aspire to own the performance, iconic, luxury editions of Fords. Perhaps they know something that we don't. As Farley pointed out in the interview, they've got that rich heritage to build on, the Mustang, the Raptor, the Bronco, etc. And these are vehicles with emotional resonance. So they connect with people in a way that Fiestas and Focuses of the world don't, or at least that's what he said. But is that true though? I mean, just looking at the values of older Fiestas now, for example, now that the Fiesta has been killed off, and even just looking at the sort of cars that would just be beat up old things that be running to the supermarket and back, I mean, those prices are beginning to firm up. And for the ones that are really good examples of old Fiestas, the prices have actually started to grow and grow quite rapidly. I mean, that suggests that these are classics, that suggests that they're collectible, and that suggests that there's a strong attachment to these iconic brands. So maybe there is something emotive about them. Still, it's fascinating to think about what this shift means for the automotive industry. Are we looking at a world where legacy brands like Ford solely focus on niche and fall back on the heritage and history of iconic brands that they have and just basically sell nostalgia and sell sentiment rather than go forward and look at the new technology that's emerging, the new sort of mobility that we're looking at, which is something, or maybe they're just saying, well, the Chinese have already stolen the march on that and we're never going to catch up with them. Is that what they're saying? I mean, or they're going to fall back on the old thing of if you can't beat them, join them, or if you can't beat them, buy them, because Ford does have a history of doing that. Do you think that maybe they're thinking, well, if we sell enough of these niche, high value, high profit margin vehicles, and actually don't forget that this will also mean shrinking their operations if they're not building mass market cars, and inevitably they're going to be shutting down factories and stuff like that, reducing their expenditure, increasing their profit margins, and then in the future go, you know what, we'll just buy MG or we'll just buy Polestar or something like that. Ford did own Volvo once, and then make up for it that way. It's possible, right? With Ford repositioning itself as this premium brand, which is still kind of a struggle with. Ford, a premium brand, a luxury car maker. I mean, even the mighty Mustang, which, is so desirable, but it's known as the blue collar hero, right? That's kind of its appeal. Having said that, even though the fact is that in Germany, all corporate executives are abandoning Porsche 911s to buy Mustang V8s. Yeah, if you didn't know that, this is a fact. The world's best-selling sports car, the Ford Mustang, has actually beaten Germany's most desirable mark in its home market. That has happened. So you know what? Ford could well be onto something here. Ford is known for its heritage, its performance cars, and the emotional appeal of its products. So they're banking on that. But if this gamble doesn't work, we could be witnessing the end of an era even as we're watching these events unfold. It's a bold gamble, it really is. But as we've seen time and time again, the automotive industry finds that bold bets can either pay off in a big way or they could lead to disaster. So is this the right bold bet for Ford to be making at this time? Well, what do you think? I look forward to hearing what you think about this, and I know there's a lot of Ford fans out there. I'm a Ford fan as well, and it'll be interesting to see what you think this is going to mean for the future of this much-loved company. Meanwhile, make sure you hit that like button, make sure you're subscribing for more updates like this. Hi guys, I've been writing. This is my first book, a novel, an all-out action thriller, and this one is a collection of 13 stories I've written over the course of 2 decades. The Euless Files and The Quantum Races by BC Guy are out now on Amazon.com. Shout out time, guys. Thank you so much. Hey, if you enjoy my content, why not get involved? Buy me a coffee. You can do that at either of these links. Or if you're watching on YouTube, buy me a thanks or take out a membership. It all helps. It really does.